Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for August 17th, 2021. The topic today is going to be what lessons have we learned from the 20-year debacle in Afghanistan. I want to begin with something which was just released a couple days ago, the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction report, which found that the policy of the U.S. toward Afghanistan involved, quote, incoherent strategies, unsustainable institutions, fundamental lack of understanding of Afghanistan's social, economic, and political context, unquote, just for starters. Now, what we saw yesterday with President Biden's statement, there were some elements of what he said that were true, but there was also a lot of disingenuousness because he had supported the Afghan war. Remember, under the Obama administration, there was a surge. Biden never spoke out against that, at least publicly. But he was right when he said it would be wrong to order U.S. troops today into Afghanistan to step up when the Afghanistan forces will not. Well, how did we get to this point? And I think we should start with what Helga Zepp-LaRouche had to say in her comments on this. She said this should be the end of a system of regime change wars. These wars did not serve the interests of the United States, either the security interests or the economic interests, and they certainly didn't serve the interests of the countries we invaded. And she included in that Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Libya. The question that's posed now is not to point the fingers, because there's a lot of blame that goes around. I think the one person who got it right, which is somewhat ironic, because he's with the CIA, which was involved in a lot of the false estimates. But former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, tweeted, he said, what happened is not the result of an intelligence failure. It is the result of numerous policy failures for multiple administrations. So let's look at what the solution would be first, and then we can come back to what the lessons are. Now, what do you do now? Just walk away? Leave the country to disintegrate? Rely on the pledges of the Taliban that there won't be retribution? Well, the Chinese are offering a perspective which was presented at a Schiller Institute conference on July 31st on the topic of will the Afghanistan war, the Afghanistan situation lead to a new paradigm? Now, what we discussed at that was that the solution in a situation like this is cooperation of neighbors for economic development. That is, to go in and connect Afghanistan to the rest of the world. The Chinese are offering to do that with the Belt and Road Initiative. And we should join hands with them. We should join hands with any of the neighbors, including India, Pakistan, Russia, Uzbekistan, Iran, other countries in that area who are saying that they would like to participate in a successful development perspective for Afghanistan. Now, China said they will aid in the development of Afghanistan through the extension of the Belt and Road Initiative with three conditions. And those are the Taliban must cut all ties with terrorists, extremists, and separatists. If they do that, that is, if they don't let Afghanistan become a haven for operations not just against the United States, but against other nations in the region, if they do that, then China is willing to connect Afghanistan through the Pakistan-China economic corridor. It would become a transshipment center, logistics center between the eastern part of Asia and Central Asia, Southwest Asia, and even to Europe. Now, that's the way we have to go, and the Executive Intelligence Review has put out a special report that discusses this. Will Afghanistan trigger a paradigm change? And this, as I said, was the subject of our July 31st conference on the question of what's next in Afghanistan. Now, on this question of an intelligence failure, the delusion that U.S. trained troops would fight, the question is, what were they fighting for? The U.S. intent in Afghanistan was never to build a democratic industrial nation. It was part of a geopolitical strategy. We did not have an approach to it like we did with Japan after World War II or South Korea after the Korean War, where we spent significant amounts of money, but also brought in personnel who developed the transportation systems, the power systems, revitalized the industries that had been destroyed. Instead, we went into Afghanistan to engage in geopolitics. Our first intervention into Afghanistan was in the 1980s, when the decision was made that we would try to turn Afghanistan into the Soviet Union's Vietnam. And to do that, who did we arm? We armed the Taliban. We armed the bin Laden networks that became the Al-Qaeda, the same networks that have attacked us internationally. We armed and trained them. And once they drove the Soviets out, we turned our backs on the country and let Taliban go in and form a government, which is why we ended up invading after 9/11 in 2001. We did nothing to help overcome the nation's underdevelopment. Now, you can't overcome underdevelopment with money. If you just pour money into existing structures, what you get is corruption. We have evidence of that all over the world, that the people who become the government look to the United States. Maybe they'll build a few things, but they're looking to the United States to get the money. So you have to instead fight for a development perspective. And that's what we have presented in our reporting. Now, why do we say it was geopolitics, British geopolitics in particular, that failed? Well, it's good that we can say that now and see it, because that's what has to end if we're going to end this era of constant warfare, constant geopolitical confrontation, and so on. So the lessons from Afghanistan must be no more geopolitics. And by geopolitics, it means using regions of the world, nations of the world, and peoples of the world as proxy battlefields between the British and the US and NATO versus supposedly the adversarial powers, in this case primarily Russia and China. Now, the lesson then is no geopolitics, no regime change wars. How do you know you're imposing a government which is going to be popular, which is going to do what's necessary? You don't. That has to be the choice not of the great powers, but of the people who live in that country. And third, you should extend a hand of cooperation for economic development, because that's the way you build trust. That's the way you overcome the tensions and the hostility, the suspicions that exist when a country comes in and says, oh, we're here to help you. Now, here's one of the ironies of the situation. I think one of the most profound ironies. The fall of Kabul occurred exactly 50 years to the day after President Nixon moved on August 15, 1971, to start the process that ended the Bretton Woods system, ended the fixed exchange system, and set up a global system of free trade, deregulated economies, no fixed exchange rate. It created a neo-colonial world, a system which was used to justify great power military intervention. And what did the military intervention do? Enforce attacks against sovereign nations. Sovereign nations that decided to act against the International Monetary Fund, against the international banking community to defend their people and their nation. Those are the countries we attacked. Look at Iraq, look at Libya. Countries that were making progress toward development programs to take care of their people, a healthcare system, education system, water management, transportation. These are the countries that were attacked because they no longer were willing to submit to the arbitrary rules of a so-called rules-based order. And so that's why these regime change wars have been carried out. You either submit to the rules-based order or there will be regime change. So has the debacle of 20 years in Afghanistan taught us that? Well, if you look at the media and listen to most politicians, the answer is no. Republicans are using this to attack Biden, as though Biden set the conditions here. Biden, for his own part, is then attacking Trump. Now, Trump tried to do the right thing, but he didn't succeed. And now he's turning around saying Biden screwed it up. Well, Trump was right to say we should get out of these wars, but he was unable to overcome the power of those entrenched forces of the military-industrial complex, which kept us in those wars. He wanted to extend the U.S. hand to cooperation, economic development cooperation with Russia and China, but that was stopped by the deep state. And so far, if you listen to people like Blinken and Jake Sullivan and the Defense Secretary Austin, it appears as though Biden is going to follow the same rules-based order, the same geopolitical doctrine, which has gotten us into these wars, these endless wars. So it's time that we learn this lesson. And I would urge people, go look at the discussion, the dialogue that took place at the July 31st conference of the Schiller Institute. It's archived, you can see it. It will show you that there are people from all over the world who are willing to sit down and talk about how to overcome the geopolitical confrontations which we take as a natural condition in the world. It's not natural. It's the result of the destruction of the very ideas of our constitutional tradition, destruction of the philosophical outlook of the Founding Fathers, as expressed by John Quincy Adams, who said we should not go abroad to seek monsters to fight. Instead, we have to work with other countries for a mutual development. And that should be the lesson, at least the first lesson, we take from the situation in Afghanistan. Probably this Saturday we'll have a follow-up to that July 31st conference, so watch this site for details of that. And thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you again tomorrow.